My name is Stella, 32 years old, and I was once a thriving interior designer in Portland, until the economic downturn left me jobless. When my parents offered their unfinished basement as temporary housing, I invested 3 months and $23,000 to transform it into a beautiful apartment. Then came the bombshell. "Your sister will live here," my father announced coldly, giving me days to vacate the space I had created with my own hands and savings. I never imagined my own family could betray me so completely. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted. Let's see if my story resonates with your experiences. I had built a successful career as an interior designer in Portland for 8 years before everything came crashing down. My company had been struggling for months as the housing market cooled, and I kept reassuring myself that things would improve. Then came the dreaded company-wide email calling us to an emergency meeting. I remember sitting in that sterile conference room watching our CEO struggle through his prepared speech about unfortunate market conditions and necessary workforce reductions. When my name appeared on the layoff list, it felt surreal. "We value your contributions, Stella," my manager said mechanically while handing me a small severance package. "I'm sure someone with your talents will land on their feet quickly." But the job market told a different story. Week after week, I sent applications into what felt like a void. The few interviews I managed to secure ended with the same response: "We've decided to go with someone with more specialized experience." My savings dwindled as I continued paying rent on my downtown apartment, and the stress of impending financial disaster kept me awake most nights. By the 3rd month of unemployment, I was facing some harsh realities. My apartment lease was ending, and the renewal notice on my kitchen counter showed a 20% increase I simply couldn't afford. I sat at my small dining table one evening, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible numbers work. Throughout my adult life, I had prided myself on my independence. After graduating with my design degree, I had moved directly to Portland and built my career from scratch, returning home to visit my parents only for holidays and special occasions. They had always been supportive, especially my father. He had framed my first professional design sketch and hung it prominently in their living room, bragging about "my daughter the artist" to anyone who visited. "You get your creativity from my side of the family," he would say with a wink. Though we sometimes clashed due to his controlling nature, I never doubted his love or pride in my accomplishments. That night, facing financial ruin, I finally swallowed my pride and called home. "Sweetheart, of course you can stay with us," my mother said immediately. "For as long as you need." My father got on the phone next, his deep voice reassuring. "Stella, this might actually be perfect timing. We've been talking about finishing the basement for years, but never got around to it. With your expertise, you could transform it into a proper apartment and you'd have your own space while you get back on your feet." "Dad, I don't know if I can afford to renovate your basement right now," I explained. "Think of it as an investment," he countered. "You provide the design skills and oversee the work, and this can be your rent-free accommodation until you're stable again. Plus, you'll have an incredible before and after for your portfolio." The idea started to take shape in my mind. A project would give me purpose during this difficult time, and staying with my parents in the suburbs would drastically reduce my expenses. "We want to help you, honey," my mother added. "And this way, you're helping us too." 2 weeks later, I arrived at my parents' suburban home, with my car packed full of belongings, the rest in a small storage unit I'd rented. Their split-level house looked exactly as I remembered. Neat garden beige siding the tire swing my father had hung from the oak tree when I was 10, still swaying gently in the breeze. My father gave me a bear hug as I stepped out of the car. "Welcome home, kiddo." That afternoon, we went down to examine the basement together. It was every bit as neglected as I remembered. Concrete floors, exposed beams, stacks of holiday decorations, and old furniture creating obstacle courses throughout the space. A few small windows near the ceiling let in minimal natural light, and the musty smell of disuse permeated everything. "It's going to be a challenge," I admitted, already mentally measuring and planning. "If anyone can make this place shine, it's you," my father said, his hand on my shoulder. "Remember how you transformed that abandoned warehouse into that award-winning restaurant space? This will be a piece of cake compared to that." That evening, over dinner, I sketched preliminary ideas for the basement, while my parents watched with interest. I envisioned an open concept studio with defined areas for sleeping, living, and working, plus a full bathroom and kitchenette. "This is going to increase your property value significantly," I explained. Even accounting for materials and some hired help for plumbing and electrical, you're looking at a great return on investment. And the best part is having you home while you do it, my mother said, squeezing my hand. What struck me later was that throughout this entire planning session, neither of my parents mentioned my sister Jessica. She lived in Chicago with her husband Scott, working as a pharmaceutical sales representative. We had always had a complex relationship, not hostile but definitely competitive, as the younger sister Jessica had often felt overshadowed by my academic and professional achievements, while I envied her social ease and conventional life choices that seemed to please our parents so effortlessly. Had I known what was coming, I might have asked about her that night, but wrapped in the comfort of my childhood home and the excitement of a new project, I missed the first crucial signs of the betrayal to come. The renovation began with a surge of creative energy. I spent the first week developing detailed plans, researching materials, and creating a realistic budget. I wanted to transform the dark, musty basement into a bright, comfortable living space that would serve as both a sanctuary and a showpiece for my portfolio. My father joined me for the initial shopping trip to the home improvement warehouse. I carefully selected materials, balancing quality with cost consciousness. At the flooring section, I was comparing samples of engineered hardwood when my father pointed to a vinyl option. "This one is half the price, Stella. Looks almost the same to me," he suggested. "Dad, the vinyl won't last as long and it won't add the same value to the home," I explained patiently. "I'm thinking long-term here." He seemed pleased with my professional assessment. That's my girl, always the expert. Those early days held a special sweetness as my father and I worked side by side. He helped me tear out old shelving units and clear decades of accumulated storage. We found forgotten treasures. My elementary school art projects, Jessica's high school softball trophies, old photo albums. Each discovery prompted stories and laughter. "Remember this?" he would ask, holding up some relic from my childhood. "You were so determined even then." But as the demolition phase gave way to actual construction, my father became increasingly scarce. "Got a full schedule today," he would say at breakfast before disappearing upstairs to his home office or out to run errands. I tried not to feel disappointed. After all, I was the professional here. The first major setback came when I removed the old wood paneling to find black mold spreading across the concrete walls. The remediation alone would cost thousands I hadn't budgeted for. Then came the discovery that the electrical wiring was dangerously outdated and would need to be completely replaced to meet code requirements. "These houses from the 70s always hide surprises," said Marco, a contractor friend I called for advice. "And none of them are good or cheap." Each new problem meant more money from my dwindling savings. I had initially budgeted $12,000 for the entire renovation. By the third week, I was approaching $15,000, with much still to be done. One evening, sitting alone on the basement stairs, surveying the chaos of construction, I seriously considered scaling back my plans. Perhaps I could leave the kitchenette unfinished, or choose simpler fixtures for the bathroom. But professional pride and the desire to create something truly beautiful won out. I would do this right even if it meant investing most of my remaining savings. I updated my parents regularly on the progress, showing them material samples and explaining each phase of the work. They seemed impressed and grateful, though I noticed my father often checking his watch during these conversations or stepping away to take phone calls. "Everything looks wonderful, sweetheart," my mother would say, but something in her expression seemed increasingly strained. Every few weeks, I would video call with Jessica in Chicago. She would give obligatory compliments on the renovation photos I shared, then quickly turn the conversation to her own life, her sales targets, neighborhood drama, or weekend plans with Scott. During one such call in my 6th week of renovation, Jessica seemed unusually interested in the basement project. "So you're creating a complete apartment down there, with its own entrance and everything?" she asked. "Yes, I'm installing a private exterior door so I won't have to go through the main house to come and go," I explained. "It's giving me great experience with small space design." Jessica's smile tightened slightly. "How convenient for you. Must be nice to have such a perfect arrangement fall into your lap when you needed it." I bristled at her tone. "It's hardly falling into my lap. I'm putting thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours into this renovation. Still," she pressed, "free housing in exchange for doing what you already love. Some people would call that lucky." Before I could respond, she abruptly changed the subject. "Scott's working late again tonight, 3rd time this week." Something in her voice caught my attention, a brittleness that hadn't been there before. But when I asked if everything was okay, she quickly pasted on a smile. "Everything's fine, just busy with work." The conversation moved on and I dismissed my concerns about her marriage. Jessica and Scott had always seemed like the perfect couple, high school sweethearts who had followed each other to the same college and married right after graduation. They had the life my parents had always envisioned for both their daughters, stable, traditional, predictable. By the midpoint of the project, when the drywall was finally up and the space was beginning to take shape, my parents hosted a small dinner to celebrate the progress. They invited a few neighbors who oohed and ahed at the transformation taking place below their feet. "You'd never know this was the same basement," marveled Mrs. Lawson from next door. "You should consider doing this professionally, dear." "She does," my father jumped in proudly. "Stella's one of the top interior designers in Portland. Or was until this economic mess." I winced at his phrasing, but appreciated his evident pride. That night, surrounded by admiring neighbors and my supportive parents, I felt secure in our arrangement. I was creating something valuable for my family while getting back on my feet. The growing tension in my father's shoulders when we discussed project timelines, or the way my mother would change the subject when I mentioned my long-term plans to stay until I found stable employment. I noticed these things but failed to recognize them as warning signs. It was around this time that I began to overhear snippets of hushed phone conversations. One night, returning from a late hardware store run, I caught my father's voice from his study. "We need to figure this out, Jess. Yes, I know it's complicated. No, we haven't told her yet." When he emerged and saw me in the hallway, he quickly explained he'd been talking to a colleague about a consulting project. But the nervous dart of his eyes told me otherwise. Still, I was too absorbed in my renovation to give it much thought. The following week, I noticed my father spending unusual amounts of time in the basement when I was out examining the work with a critical eye I hadn't seen before. And my mother, normally chatty and warm, grew increasingly quiet at dinner, avoiding discussions about the project's timeline. A text from Jessica further heightened my unease, just wondering what are the exact dimensions of that basement apartment? And is the kitchenette big enough to cook real meals or just basics? The questions seemed oddly specific for someone who had shown only passing interest in the renovation. When I called to ask why she wanted to know, she laughed it off. "Just curious about what you're creating. It sounds so cozy." Still, I pushed these concerns aside. I had landed a promising job interview with a boutique design firm in Portland, and my focus was on preparation. The position would allow me to rebuild my career and eventually move back to the city. When I shared the news with my parents, their reactions were strangely subdued. "That's wonderful," my mother said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. My father merely nodded. "Don't count your chickens before they hatch, Stella. The economy's still shaky." His lack of enthusiasm stung, but I attributed it to parental caution. Little did I know that forces were already in motion that would shatter both my new living space and my trust in my family. The day of my interview dawned bright and full of promise. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a tailored navy blazer over a cream silk blouse paired with charcoal trousers, and the lucky earrings I'd worn to every important meeting of my career. The basement apartment was nearly complete, now lacking only a few finishing touches and some decorative elements. Living in the beautiful space I'd created gave me a renewed sense of confidence. "You've got this, Stella," I told my reflection as I applied a final touch of lipstick. "Show them what you're capable of." The interview went even better than I'd hoped. The firm's creative director was impressed by my portfolio, especially the basement transformation, which showed my ability to maximize small spaces with limited budgets. By the time we shook hands at the end of our meeting, she was already discussing potential projects and clients. "I think you'd be a great fit for our team, Stella," she said. "We'll need to talk salary and details, but I'm hoping you can start within the next 2 weeks." I drove home with the windows down, singing along to the radio, my spirit lighter than it had been in months. The future I'd feared lost was suddenly back within reach. I couldn't wait to share the good news with my parents. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both their cars were home unusual for mid-afternoon on a weekday. My father's consulting work normally kept him busy with client meetings, and my mother volunteered at the local hospital on Tuesdays. I entered through the front door calling out, "Mom, Dad, you're not going to believe how well the interview went." The house remained strangely silent. I set my portfolio down on the entry table and walked toward the living room where I found both my parents sitting stiffly on the sofa. The formal way they were positioned, backs straight, hands folded in their laps, immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. "What's going on?" I asked, my earlier excitement evaporating. "Is everything okay?" My father cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice had a business-like tone I rarely heard directed at family. "Sit down, Stella. We need to discuss something important." I perched on the edge of the armchair across from them, suddenly aware of my heart pounding. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your sister called last weekend," my father began. "Her marriage is over. Scott has been having an affair with a colleague for nearly a year. They're getting divorced." "Oh no," I gasped, genuinely shocked and concerned. "Poor Jessica. Why didn't anyone tell me?" My father continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Jessica needs to move back home immediately. She can't afford their Chicago apartment on her own, and she needs family support during this difficult time." A cold feeling began spreading through my chest, but I still didn't see where this was heading. "Of course she's welcome here. The guest room upstairs is always ready, and Jessica will be taking the basement apartment." My father interrupted his tone, leaving no room for discussion. "You need to find somewhere else to live." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "What are you talking about? I just finished renovating that space. We had an agreement." "Plans change, Stella. Your sister's need is greater right now." I looked to my mother for support, but she was studying her hands, her silence a tacit endorsement of my father's decree. "When did Jessica call about her divorce?" I asked, pieces starting to fall into place. My father shifted uncomfortably. "About 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? I echoed, my voice rising. "And you're only telling me now after I've spent thousands more finishing the apartment." "We needed time to figure things out," he said defensively. "Figure what out?" "How to kick me out of the space I created." The betrayal was beginning to sink in, each revelation more painful than the last. "You've known for weeks that you were going to give Jessica my apartment, and you let me continue pouring money and work into it." "It was never your apartment," my father corrected coldly. "It's our house. You were staying temporarily." Under an agreement that I would renovate it in exchange for living there until I got back on my feet. My voice was shaking now. "I just had a great interview. I might have a job offer within days. I kept my end of the bargain." My father waved his hand dismissively. "You were going to move out eventually anyway. Jessica needs a long-term solution. So do I. I spent $23,000 on that renovation, nearly everything I had left." For the first time, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't know you were spending that much, Stella. I showed you every receipt. I updated you on every cost increase. Dad helped me choose materials." My father's expression hardened. "We're prepared to give you $5,000 to compensate for your work. That seems more than fair." $5,000, I repeated incredulously. "The market value of what I've done is at least $45,000. I transformed an unfinished basement into a luxury apartment." "You're exaggerating, Wait," he dismissed. "Besides, this is family, not business." "Clearly," I said bitterly. "If this were business, I wouldn't be getting robbed." My father's face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Stella. Jessica arrives on Friday. You have 2 days to make other arrangements. You can accept our offer or not, but the decision about the basement is final." I looked between my parents, searching for any sign of the loving support they had offered just months ago. My mother still wouldn't meet my eyes, and my father's expression was implacable. "So that's it. You're choosing Jessica over me again." The old childhood hurt surfaced unexpectedly. "This isn't about choosing," my father said, but his eyes told a different story. Jessica had always been his favourite, the daughter who followed his advice, who chose the practical career he approved of, who married young as he thought proper. I stood up, legs shaking. "I need some time to process this." As I turned to leave, my father added, "The $5,000 offer expires tomorrow. After that, we consider your work a family contribution." I descended the stairs to my soon-to-be former apartment, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the bottom, I surveyed the space I had created with such care and pride. The recessed lighting casting a warm glow on the fresh paint. The engineered hardwood floors I had installed plank by painstaking plank. The custom kitchen cabinets I had saved for specifically. All of it created for a home I was now being forced to abandon. I sank onto the new sofa, the last piece of furniture I had splurged on just last week, and finally let the tears come. Beyond the financial loss, the betrayal cut deep into the core of what I believed about my family and my place within it. The message was clear: when it really mattered, I was dispensable. My phone buzzed with a text from the design firm's director. "Really enjoyed meeting you today. Looking forward to talking next steps tomorrow." The professional opportunity that had buoyed my spirits just an hour ago now seemed like a cruel joke. I had a potential job but nowhere to live, no savings to secure a new apartment, and parents who had just shown their true colours in the most devastating way possible. That night I cried until there were no tears left. Cycling through shock, grief, and rage, by morning something had shifted within me. I knew what I needed to do. The night after my parents' shocking announcement, I barely slept. I lay in the bed I had carefully selected for this space, staring at the ceiling. I had painted a soft, calming blue, and cycled through every emotion imaginable. Grief gave way to rage, which collapsed into hurt, then hardened into resolve. By dawn, my path was clear. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't create the family drama my father so often complained about. Instead, I would act with the quiet dignity they had failed to show me. Over coffee, I made a series of calculations. Based on contractor rates and material costs, the market value of my renovation was approximately $48,000. Subtracting what a fair rent would have been for 3 months, I had still contributed at least $45,000 to my parents' property value. The $5,000 they offered was insultingly inadequate, barely covering a tenth of my investment. With new clarity, I called the design firm that had interviewed me. "Melissa, this is Stella. I want to thank you again for the opportunity yesterday. I began professionally despite the chaos in my personal life. I'm calling because my housing situation has suddenly changed, and I'm wondering if there's any possibility of starting earlier than we discussed." There was a pause on the line. "How much earlier?" "Immediately," I admitted. "Today or tomorrow if possible. I understand that's unusual, but I'm ready to dive in." To my surprise, Melissa's response was warm and accommodating. "Actually, we just had a client move up their timeline on a major project. Having you start right away would be incredibly helpful, but what about your living situation?" I took a deep breath. "That's the complicated part. I need to relocate immediately, and I'm wondering if the firm has any connections for temporary housing." Melissa was quiet for a moment. "Let me make a few calls. We sometimes help with relocation for new hires, and I know one of our senior designers has a guest cottage they've rented to interns before. I can't promise anything, but give me an hour." After hanging up, I began methodically packing my essential belongings. Clothes, professional materials, personal items. I was careful not to make too much noise. My parents had left early that morning, my father for a client meeting, my mother for errands, likely to avoid another confrontation. As I packed, I documented everything in the apartment. I took detailed photos of every improvement, from the custom shelving to the high-end bathroom fixtures. I gathered all receipts and organized them into a spreadsheet calculating exact costs. I wrote detailed notes about the labor, involved hours spent, and professional expertise applied. A text from my lawyer friend Andrea confirmed my suspicions. "What you're describing sounds like a case of unjust enrichment. Document everything. We should talk ASAP." Another text, this one from Melissa. "Good news. Our designer Lisa has a mother-in-law suite sitting empty. It's yours for 6 weeks minimal rent. Can you start tomorrow? We have a client meeting at 10 a.m. Everything was falling into place with a speed that felt almost miraculous. Or perhaps it was simply the universe balancing the scales after my parents' betrayal. By noon, my car was packed with essentials. I left behind the furniture I had purchased for the apartment. It had been selected specifically for that space and served as physical evidence of my investment. In the center of the pristine quartz countertop I had installed, I placed a simple envelope containing a note. "I have left to accept a position that begins immediately. I will be in touch regarding financial settlement for the improvements I made to your property, valued at $45,000 plus. Please do not contact me except through the channels I establish. Stella." I did not say where I was going. I did not wish them well with Jessica. I simply stated facts and left, closing the door quietly behind me. The drive to Portland felt surreal. 3 months ago, I had made the same journey in reverse, full of mixed emotions, but trusting in my parents' support. Now I returned to the city with my trust shattered, but my professional future possibly brighter than before. Lisa's mother-in-law suite proved to be a charming small space above a detached garage in a leafy Portland neighborhood. "It's nothing fancy," she apologized, "but it's private and clean. It's perfect." I assured her, thinking how ironic it was that a stranger was showing me more consideration than my own family. That evening, I turned off my phone, unplugged from the world, and focused on preparing for tomorrow's client meeting. I would channel all my hurt and betrayal into professional excellence. My parents had made their choice. Now I was making mine. The next day passed in a blur of introductions, client presentations, and design discussions. My new colleagues were welcoming, the work engaging, and for hours at a time, I could almost forget the personal earthquake that had just shaken my foundation. When I finally turned my phone back on that evening, I found 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. My father's communications evolved from irritated, "Where are you? We need to talk about your note," to concerned, "Stella, your mother is worried. Please call," to angry, "This is childish behavior. Call us immediately." My mother's texts were purely emotional, "Please come home, sweetheart. We can work this out." Most surprising were the messages from Jessica. "Stella, I just arrived and they told me what happened. I had no idea they hadn't discussed this with you. Please call me." I read everything but responded to nothing. Silent dignity would be my approach. Let them wonder, let them worry, let them face the consequences of their actions without the comfort of my forgiveness. The following morning, I contacted Andrea and formally retained her as my attorney. By afternoon, she had drafted a letter outlining my legal claim for the full value of improvements made to my parents' property under the doctrine of unjust enrichment. This letter establishes that you had a reasonable expectation of compensation for your professional services and financial investment, Andrea explained. It details the market value of improvements and requests full reimbursement plus interest. "Will it work?" I asked. "It establishes that you're serious and knowledgeable about your rights. Whether they pay depends on how much they want to avoid court and bad family feelings." The letter was sent by certified mail the next day. I maintained my silence, focusing instead on building my new life. My phone continued to accumulate messages, growing increasingly frantic as 48 hours of silence stretched to 72. The call from my father came just hours after he must have received Andrea's letter. When I saw his name on my screen, I took a deep breath and answered professionally, as if speaking to a difficult client. "Hello, this is Stella." "What the hell is this legal nonsense?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "You're suing your own family." "I'm requesting fair compensation for professional services and materials," I corrected calmly, "as outlined in the letter." "This is ridiculous. We offered you $5,000 for $45,000 in value. That's not an offer, Dad. It's an insult." His tone shifted, becoming manipulative, a tactic I recognized from childhood disagreements. "Stella, honey, I know you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle family disputes. Your mother is beside herself. This isn't a family dispute. It's a business matter. You treated our agreement like a business decision when you unilaterally terminated it. I'm simply responding in kind." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Jessica is devastated by all this. She says she never asked to take your place. That's between you and Jessica. My issue is with the $23,000 I invested based on our agreement, which you broke. You would really take us to court." The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. He had never imagined I would stand up to him this way. "I would really expect to be treated fairly," I countered. "The choice of how that happens is yours." After I hung up, I felt a strange lightness. For the first time in my adult life, I had set a boundary with my father and held it firmly. The outcome was still uncertain, but the act itself was transformative. Later that evening, Jessica called. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Stella, I swear I didn't know," she began without preamble. "They told me they had discussed everything with you and you were fine with moving out. I only learnt the truth when I arrived and found your note." "And yet you're still staying in the apartment I created," I observed. "Actually, no," I refused. "I'm in the guest room upstairs. I told them I wouldn't be part of this." This surprised me. Jessica and I had always had a complicated relationship, but perhaps I had underestimated her sense of fairness. "They lied to both of us," she continued. "They told me weeks ago that I could come home any time, that they had always planned for the basement to be my emergency landing spot if needed. I had no idea about your financial investment or that they hadn't discussed it with you. What's happening there now?" I found myself asking, curiosity overcoming my resolve to remain detached. Jessica sighed heavily. "Mom's crying all the time. Dad's alternating between defensive ranting and silent brooding. And I'm seriously considering finding my own place immediately. Family support be damned." "Don't leave on my account," I said automatically. "It's not just that. Being here reminds me of why I was so eager to leave after high school. Dad's controlling everything, Mom's enabling it, and I'm supposed to play the grateful, obedient daughter. It's suffocating. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with my sister. We had both been shaped by the same family dynamic, just in different ways. "Where are you staying, Ruth?" she asked cautiously. "I'd rather not say right now. I'm safe and I have a new job." "That's good," she said softly. "For what it's worth, I think you're right to demand fair payment." I told Dad the same thing. After we hung up, I sat in my temporary home, reflecting on the unexpected turns my life had taken. In less than a week, I had lost my housing, started a new job, established firm boundaries with my father, and possibly begun rebuilding my relationship with my sister. It wasn't the path I had expected, but perhaps it was the one I needed. The days following my dramatic departure blended together in a whirlwind of new routines and professional challenges. At the design firm, I threw myself into work with an intensity that impressed my new colleagues. The clients whose meeting I had attended on my first day signed a contract for a full home renovation, my first major project in months. "Your portfolio is impressive, but it's your problem-solving skills that really stand out," Melissa told me after the clients left. Especially that basement apartment transformation. The before and after photos are striking. I smiled tightly, not mentioning that I no longer had access to the space I had created, that it now sat largely unused, too tainted by family betrayal for Jessica to accept, yet a constant reminder to my parents of their poor handling of the situation. As I settled into my professional role, the personal drama continued to unfold at a distance. My father called repeatedly, his messages evolving from angry to conciliatory as the reality of my legal claim sank in. My mother left tearful voicemails about family healing. I listened to each message, but maintained my position. This was a business matter that required a business solution. Andrea kept me updated on the legal proceedings. "Your father's attorney contacted me," she reported one afternoon. "They're suggesting a meeting to discuss settlement terms." "What are they offering, Buck?" I asked, bracing myself. $15,000, still well below market value, but movement from their original position. I shook my head. "Not enough. The materials alone cost more than that." Andrea nodded approvingly. "That's what I told them. I counter-offered with $40,000 plus legal fees." How did they respond? "They're taking it under advisement, which typically means your father is having a tantrum before eventually coming around to reality." I couldn't help but smile at her assessment. My father had always been used to getting his way, especially with family. This boundary setting was new territory for all of us. Jessica and I spoke every few days. Her perspective on our family dynamics was evolving rapidly as she experienced our parents as an adult in crisis. Dad tried to tell me what job interviews to pursue yesterday. She reported frustration evident in her voice. When I mentioned I was considering a position in marketing instead of pharmaceutical sales, he launched into a lecture about throwing away years of experience. "Sounds familiar." I sympathized. "Remember when I switched my major to interior design? He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I always thought you were exaggerating about how controlling he is," she admitted. "I guess I was the good daughter for so long that I didn't notice." These conversations were healing something between us that had been broken for years. Without competing for our parents' approval, we were discovering genuine common ground. A week after receiving Andrea's counteroffer, my father requested a meeting. After consulting with my attorney, I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a conference room at her law firm. Walking into that meeting was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My father looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she arranged and rearranged her purse on her lap. They had brought their own attorney, a silver-haired man with a patrician bearing, who introduced himself as Richard Wells. Andrea laid out my position clearly and professionally. My client invested $23,000 in materials and approximately 300 hours of professional design and labor services in your property, with a reasonable expectation of compensation either in the form of continued residence or financial reimbursement. When you terminated the living arrangement without adequate notice or cause, you created a situation of unjust enrichment. Mr. Wells offered some technical objections about family agreements and verbal contracts, but the facts were clear. My documentation was meticulous, from dated photographs showing the transformation to itemized receipts for every material purchased. Throughout the legal discussion, my father remained uncharacteristically silent, his jaw working as if chewing on words he was forcing himself not to say. My mother occasionally dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Finally, Mr. Wells conferred briefly with my parents before addressing Andrea. Our clients are prepared to offer full compensation for materials purchased, $23,000, plus an additional $10,000 for labor and inconvenience. Andrea looked to me. We had discussed our bottom line earlier. $35,000 would cover my actual expenses, plus enough to secure a new apartment in Portland. I nodded slightly, and Andrea responded, "My client accepts with the addition of our modest legal fees." The relief in the room was palpable. As the attorneys drafted the settlement agreement, my mother finally spoke directly to me. "Stella, please come home for dinner soon. We miss you." I met her eyes steadily. "I'm not ready for that, Mom. This meeting resolves the financial aspect, but the trust that was broken will take much longer to repair." My father cleared his throat. "You've made your point, Stella. We understand you were upset. This isn't about making a point," I corrected him gently but firmly. "This is about recognizing that actions have consequences. I trusted you, and that trust was violated. Rebuilding it will require time and different behaviors, not just financial settlement." He looked genuinely puzzled, as if the concept of earning back trust was foreign to him. Perhaps it was. Throughout my childhood, his authority had gone largely unquestioned. This was new territory for all of us. As we prepared to leave, Jessica texted me, "How did it go? They've been nervous all day." I responded simply, "Settlement reached. We'll call you later." That evening, sitting in my temporary housing with a glass of wine, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at the financial resolution, lingering hurt at the betrayal, pride in standing my ground, and underneath it all, a quiet grief for the relationship with my parents that would never be quite the same again. Yet alongside that grief was something unexpected hope. Not for an immediate restoration of what was lost, but for the possibility of building something new and healthier in its place. Something based on mutual respect rather than unquestioned authority and silent compliance. I had lost my basement apartment but found my voice. And in the grand accounting of life that seemed like a fair exchange. 6 months passed, transforming my life in ways I could never have predicted during those dark days after my parents' betrayal. The settlement money arrived promptly as agreed, providing the financial cushion I needed to secure my future. After 2 months in Lisa's mother-in-law suite, I found a charming one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house near Portland's Pearl District. It wasn't large, but it had character. Bay windows, hardwood floors, and high ceilings that gave me plenty of canvas for my design sensibilities. The firm promoted me to senior designer after I brought in 3 major clients who specifically requested to work with me after seeing my portfolio. The basement apartment transformation ironically remained my most compelling work sample, proof of my ability to create luxury in limited space with careful planning and material selection. My relationship with my parents evolved slowly and not without setbacks. For the first month after the settlement, I maintained minimal contact. Brief text responses to my mother's messages, holiday cards, mailed precisely on time, but no visits or calls. I needed that distance to process my feelings and establish new boundaries. The first family gathering I attended was Thanksgiving, held at my aunt's house rather than my parents' home. The neutral territory helped, as did my aunt's no-nonsense personality that prevented my father from dominating conversations as he typically did. "You look well, Stella," my mother said tentatively when I arrived. "Your new haircut suits you." "Thanks, Mom. The apartment is working out great." My father approached awkwardly, clearly rehearsed. "Your mother showed me the website for your design firm. The projects look impressive." This was as close to professional validation as he had ever offered, and I recognized the effort it required from him. "Thank you. We've been busy." These small, stilted exchanges were the beginning of a new type of relationship. More formal, less intimate, but also less entangled. I no longer sought his approval or feared his disappointment. We were adults negotiating a relationship based on current behavior rather than historical patterns. Jessica and I surprisingly grew closer through the family rupture. She had indeed refused to use the basement apartment, which now sat mostly unused, an expensive guest suite for occasional visitors. After 2 uncomfortable months in our parents' home, she found her own apartment and a new job in marketing just as she had hoped. "You inspired me," she told me over coffee one Saturday. "Watching you stand up to Dad made me realize I could do the same. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be the daughter he wanted, and it never made me happy." "It's not easy breaking those patterns," I acknowledged. "I still catch myself sometimes wanting to please him, even after everything that happened. But we're doing it anyway. she said, raising her mug in a small toast. To boundaries and new beginnings. My father's attempts at reconciliation initially came in the form of expensive gifts. A leather portfolio embossed with my initials, a gift certificate to a high-end furniture store. I accepted them politely, but made it clear that material items couldn't resolve emotional breaches. I don't need gifts, Dad, I explained during one particularly tense phone call. I need respect for my autonomy and acknowledgement of the hurt caused. I don't understand what more you want, he said, frustration evident in his voice. We paid the settlement. We've apologized. What else is there? Genuine understanding, I replied simply. Not just words, but actions that show you see me as an adult with valid feelings and choices. Base. The conversation ended awkwardly, but something must have resonated because his approach began to shift. He started asking questions about my work and actually listening to the answers. He stopped offering unsolicited advice about my career or living situation. Small steps but meaningful ones. My mother invited me to lunch about 4 months after the settlement, just the two of us. At a quiet corner table in her favorite cafe, she finally opened up about her role in the situation. I knew what your father was doing was wrong, she admitted, eyes downcast. I should have stopped it, or at least warned you. I've always been the peacekeeper, the one who smooths things over, but this time my silence caused real harm. Why didn't you say anything? I asked the question that had haunted me for months. She sighed deeply. Fear mostly. Fear of conflict. Fear of your father's disapproval. It's a pattern we established early in our marriage that became harder to break with each passing year. She reached for my hand across the table. But seeing how much it hurt you, and then watching you stand up for yourself, it made me realize how much my conflict avoidance has cost all of us. Are things changing between you and Dad? I asked carefully. A small smile lifted her lips. Yes, though not without difficulty. I'm learning to speak up more, and he's learning to listen, sometimes. We're seeing a counselor. This news surprised and touched me. My parents, married for 35 years and set in their ways, were actively working to change their relationship dynamic. It gave me hope that perhaps our family relationships weren't permanently damaged, just transforming into something different. Through therapy sessions of my own, I began to recognize unhealthy patterns I had carried into adulthood, seeking validation through achievement, difficulty, expressing anger directly, tendency to overfunction in relationships. The betrayal over the basement apartment had been painful, but it had also been clarifying, bringing these patterns into sharp relief so I could finally address them. Difficult experiences often serve as our greatest teachers, my therapist observed during one session. The question is whether we're willing to learn the lessons they offer. I was learning about boundaries, about self-worth, about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness, I discovered, was something I could do for myself, releasing the active anger that consumed energy I needed for healing. Reconciliation was a mutual process that required changed behavior from all involved. My parents' basement still represented a complicated symbol in our family narrative. My father occasionally mentioned it during our limited conversations. Updates about minor issues with the plumbing or how a neighbor had admired the design. I listened politely but offered no solutions or comments. That chapter was closed. Instead, I focused my creative energy on my new apartment and my clients' projects. I built a life that reflected my values and priorities, not those imposed by family expectations. I developed friendships with colleagues who appreciated my professional expertise and personal boundaries equally. 7 months after leaving my parents' home, I received an invitation to dinner at their house. The first such invitation since the conflict. I considered declining, but ultimately decided to accept. Jessica would be there too, providing both moral support and a buffer. The evening was neither as terrible as I feared, nor as healing as I might have hoped. My father was clearly on his best behavior, making visible efforts to ask questions and listen to answers. My mother had prepared all my favorite foods and olive branch served on her best china. We navigated conversation carefully, staying with safe topics. Work projects, community news, Jessica's new apartment. After dinner, as Jessica helped our mother clear the dishes, my father asked me to step into his study, the room that had always served as the seat of his authority in our home. I followed with some trepidation. Once the door closed behind us, he turned to face me, hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic pose. Stella, I owe you a sincere apology. I remained silent, waiting. He had offered surface apologies before usually followed by justifications. He continued uncharacteristically hesitant. I treated you unfairly regarding the basement apartment. I broke our agreement without proper discussion or consideration of your investment, both financial and emotional. It was wrong, and I am truly sorry. The words seemed rehearsed but genuine. I nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened. Your mother and I have been talking, well, with our counsellor too, about how I've treated both you girls over the years. My need for control, my difficulty accepting choices different from what I would have made. He cleared his throat. I'm trying to do better. It's not easy to change habits at my age, but I'm trying. I appreciate that, Dad, I really do. He gestured toward the 2 leather chairs by the window, the chairs where he had once lectured me about my impractical career choice, where he had expressed disappointment in my decision not to follow his path into business. Now he offered me a seat as an equal. As we sat together, something shifted between us. Not forgetting, not erasing the past, but perhaps beginning to write a different future, one based on mutual respect rather than authority and compliance. I miss you, he said simply, and I'm proud of how you've handled yourself through all this. It took courage to stand up to me the way you did. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was necessary. For both of us, I think. He nodded thoughtfully. Your mother says sometimes the people who love us best are the ones brave enough to tell us uncomfortable truths. I smiled, recognizing my mother's wisdom in the words. She's right about that. When we rejoined the others, the tension in the room had eased slightly. We weren't a healed family, not yet, perhaps not ever, in the way we had been before, but we were finding our way towards something new. Something that honoured the past without being imprisoned by it. Later that night, back in my own apartment, I stood by the window looking out at the Portland skyline. The lights of the city sparkled against the dark sky, each representing a home, a life, a story unfolding. My story had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps it had always been leading here, to this moment of hard-won independence and self-knowledge. The basement apartment that I had created with such care now existed only in photographs and memories. But what I had built within myself, strength, boundaries, professional confidence, those were foundations that couldn't be taken away. They were mine to keep and to build upon, room by room, day by day, choice by choice. Life rarely unfolds as we expect or plan. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. Sometimes we need to lose what we thought we had in order to find what we truly deserve. And sometimes the home we most need to create is the one within ourselves. A space where we can live with integrity, purpose, and peace. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else going through something similar. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share this with someone who might need to be reminded of their worth today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your value isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when life tests your strength.